Broadcasting live from the Business Radio X studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's time for Chattanooga Business Radio. Now, here are your Business Radio X hosts.
Welcome to Chattanooga Business Radio. My name is Drew Erments. We are here live at the Regis Office Center in the Talon Financial Building in beautiful downtown Chattanooga. Sitting here to the left is John Hargraves, been a very attentive, and he is with PM Environmental Incorporated. He is a regional manager and senior geologist, which I find fascinating. That's a really good business card. I like that.
It just means I'm old.
So you're a licensed professional geologist in too many states to count. And tell me a little bit about PM Environmental and what you guys do.
Well, PM Environmental is a full-service environmental consulting firm. It was based out of Michigan, but we have offices throughout the Southeast and the Midwest, and also in California. But we do a lot of work with property transactions, commercial real estate, do a lot of work with attorneys, real estate brokers, also municipalities and other quasi-governmental agencies. Risk management for those kinds of transactions. We help with assessment, remediation of chemical contamination that does occur during some of these activities. So we just try to help clean up sites and be able to get them back into some reusable function.
So, from a real world example for the uninitiated, I mean, it's maybe a mill who spent 100 years producing XYZ materials. They need someone to come in, clean up, test for environmental impact studies. And then that can be redeveloped for maybe multi-purpose, multi-family, whatever it is that the commercial developer is interested.
Yes, that is exactly right. And a lot of these terms that you may hear from time to time, kind of bantied around. Brownfield is a term that you may hear from time to time in the public and the news, and you're not really sure exactly what that is. The EPA has a definition that I don't know it's being wrote, but the way I've explained it is it's a piece of real estate, piece of real property that either is known to be impacted with some sort of environmental contaminant, or the perception is there that it's impacted. And that's really the key to that definition, is that a lot of times it's just a perception. It's an old building, as you said, a mill, 100 years old. It's kind of scary looking. You think, oh, maybe there's something there, and it keeps people away, developers or somebody who may want to reuse it, keeps them away out of the fear that they're going to run into something that they can't handle. And so this term brownfield became something for that definition for that site. There are programs now over the last 20 years or so that have evolved to help bridge the gap between those scary looking buildings and trying to get a reuse for them.
Well, and you mentioned those programs. So what are some of the funding programs that are available?
There are several that can be either public and or private. And it kind of depends on the direction that you want to go. So for instance, if it's someone that's a private developer who is just going to do it himself and doesn't necessarily want the help of a public entity or some sort of other incentives, then a lot of times it's very traditional bank loans or other investors that he or she may bring in to redevelop the site. Where we would come in is to assess that, determine what impact needed to be cleaned up, what the risks were, kind of help him define those numbers, and they put the money forward and they redevelop it themselves. So that's one way. From strictly a public entity, which a lot of times is more green space, parks. Occasionally you'll get a public entity that wants to take a piece of property and clean it up with the plan to flip it to maybe potentially to a private individual. But a lot of times with the public entities, there are grants that can be applied and see either assessment or cleanup grants. A lot of that is through either the EPA, occasionally, depending on where you are, the Appalachian Regional Commission, ARC the acronym. They have it. USDA has it. There's a lot of different of those grant programs that the public entities can tap into to try to bridge some of that gap. And then occasionally you have public-private entities, public-private partnerships, I guess is really the best way to say that, where it's a mix of those two, where you have a private redeveloper who is bringing in some of their own money, but then the public grants and the other possible tax incentives help bridge some of that as well. So it's really an individual site-by-site case how it's done.
Okay. We're here with John Hargraves with PM Environmental, if you're just joining us. So where do you fit in as part of that early stage? I mean, is that, and how do you have that introduction?
Yeah, we are typically at the very, very beginning stages. I've always tell folks who are looking at properties that are impacted or they're thinking about doing something, get us in absolutely as early as you can, because there's a lot of times there's prep work that we can do to help you out. Us and a good environmental attorney are really the two pieces that you need with this. So what we help with is, again, determining the risks, assessing a site, collecting samples, making a determination if there is, say there's asbestos in an old building, or lead-based paint, or some sort of impact in the subsurface, whether it's from underground storage tanks or chemical spills from all the history of that site. And we really try to make an unknown entity known at that point. So we can tell them, here's the kind of impact you have, here's what it is, here's where it is, and here's how much it's going to cost to do a cleanup. And a lot of times, especially on all sides, but a lot of times even on the private side, that is 9 steps forward from where they were. And a lot of times the known entity then, if they go to a bank and they get a bank interested in what they're doing, having that known environmental impact kind of eases the mind of the lender. And so then they're able to feel a little bit better about being able to loan out the money if they see this as a potentially successful development.
And I would imagine there would probably be some requirements associated with the lender to meet some of those. Oh,
yes. Our industry has some very specific assessment qualifications that have to be done. There are standards that have to be met with those reports. So there is a phased process that you go through. Initially, it is historical research to try to determine exactly how that site was used in the past and to determine which conditions could possibly have caused some sort of environmental impact. And so recognized environmental conditions is a term that we use. So those are conditions that, yes, it was a mill for 100 years and they did not practice. There were no regulations that told them how they had to take care of their chemicals or what. And so that becomes a potential condition that needs to be quantified a little bit more. And so if we find those, in the next phase is we actually do testing. So like we talked about, we collect soil and groundwater samples and other kinds of samples and really try to quantify that. So it is a phased approach. And then if there is impact and you move forward, then there's cleanup that potentially comes with that.
So one of the things that seems to have occurred over the last several years, at least maybe that's just amplified by social media, is the importance of the public contribution, or feel like they are contributing to maybe development, maybe in and around their community. What phases of, let's say, for example, the Brownfield projects, does the public have or feel like they can participate?
They should feel like they can participate in all stages of it. Most of the time, a developer, especially if they're using some sort of public money, because much of the time the public money has a tag associated with it that the community will be involved. But in order to get their public's input on, this site has been, say if it's a site that's been there for a long time, residents who grew up there remember it and maybe see it now as a negative. There's this perception that it's causing issues. So the public should be involved at that point, even if there's nobody interested in doing it, in doing anything with it at that point. There's a lot of times municipalities and communities are trying to get funding in order to assess some of these properties. With the community involvement, that's an important piece to trying to get this funding, because you have to show that the community is engaged with that. So even at the beginning, and then throughout the process, as they're trying to determine what they're going to do with the property, the input of the neighborhoods, especially the ones that are going to be directly affected by that development, they should have a voice. And the projects I've been involved with, they did have a voice. If they chose to actually, come out and discuss it. So it should be in all phases that the public should be involved.
Well, and case in point, with a project over in West Tennessee, maybe about 2 years ago, there was a local mill that was the heart and soul of this particular community. And although the jobs left, the community really, it was literally in the center of the city, and they felt like their heart was being ripped out when the city government said, well, we're going to tear this down. And so help me understand, and maybe not specific to that case, but how can the public become more aware of these type of things, both in the public and the private development?
A lot of times it's keeping in touch with the local government, the local, any kind of other communities, groups. Your group is a perfect example of something like that, of teaming, just getting the knowledge out, just knowing that, because a lot of it is word of mouth. I mean, there will be public announcements. There's public meetings. As if you keep track of those announcements, how they're posted in the newspaper. I know it's not the best, but newspapers, social media, and come out and at least engage with those. Or we can also, like with your groups, if you're looking for presentations, people to talk to in different programs, then we can also come out and do some educational presentations about what these programs do. And again, that just goes to each community being able to have that component when they're trying to apply for federal grant money, that they're already engaged within the community, and letters of support that come with those applications come from these groups. And the more local groups, the better, that they can show their support and that they understand the kind of site or the kind of properties that they want, that need to be worked on, and how they can contribute, whether it's something as simple as, we'll put somebody on your task force to help with prioritizing what sites need to be done. Or, if you were someone who had a building, okay, we'll supply meeting space, for community meetings. So it's such a wide umbrella of activities that the community can be involved in.
And just out of curiosity, does PM Environmental provide a game plan for situations like that?
Yes, we actually have. In the past, we've kind of complained about these EPA, especially EPA grant monies, not being as prevalent in the South, especially as they are in the North. So we've kind of put our money where our mouth is to some degree. In the last decade or so, we have assisted communities, primarily rural communities, with applying for that money. So we help them put the applications together, doing the research, because these smaller communities don't have the resources within their governments and the money to be able to do this. And so we help them on an in-kind basis to apply for these applications, with the intention for us to build the relationship that when the money comes, then, because they have to bid it out. It's any federal, it's not something where it's, I rub your back, you rub mine. There's really a bid process, but that we build that relationship with the community, with the elected officials and with the citizens themselves. And so when that qualifications comes out, that we kind of have that inside track to be able to become their consultant. And it's not 100%. We don't win them all, but it is something that we invest in the community to help them move forward.
Well, and you mentioned that you've been able to acquire money for Brownfield funding. I mean, what kind of numbers are we talking about, particularly in maybe the Southeast?
Typically, these grants, I'm thinking specifically about the EPA grants, they are in blocks of $200,000. So typically an assessment grant, which would be what we discussed with assessing a property for it to become a known entity of any kind of impact, the typical award is $400,000. So you'll have $200,000 for hazardous substances and then $200,000 for petroleum. So petroleum, you think of typically underground storage tanks, old gas stations, but it could be a lot of other kinds of any facility that use petroleum of some kind. Then hazardous substances is a broad category for just about everything else. And then cleanup, for instance, there's $200,000 for cleanup. There are matches that can be involved with that, but that's no reason to go into that. But yeah, we're talking about typically a $200,000 block of money, which sounds like a lot, but when you start assessing some of these sites, it can go fairly quickly.
Right, absolutely. And let's flip the script for just a moment from a developer standpoint. Maybe you've seen something, you've been in a community for a while, you see an opportunity to build single family residencies, multifamily. What's that first step, and how do they go about reaching out to you to take that first step?
Usually the developers, when they begin looking at pieces of property, especially ones that have done it a lot, have really been in the game quite a while, they know to contact a consultant. Usually, a lot of times they will also contact a bank. They'll try to get their team together early to be able just to help them understand what's there. And so at that point, then they may look at just doing it themselves privately. That they may look for some other public money, whether that's these grants or whether that's some sort of tax incentive program that could be set up through the cities or the counties or the states, where they capture non-educational taxes to help with that cleanup. So, I mean, that's really where they kind of get started. They want that vision, and then they start promoting that vision. And again, I think that's where the community can kind of help out with that is if the developer is really trying to do something serious for him, that the community should be engaged and should be involved with that. And we've seen lots of examples of those kinds of partnerships, of very successful redevelopments.
Well, and given Chattanooga's rich history in industry and manufacturing, I would imagine, and given their most recent, particularly downtown, the growth and development, you're probably a very busy man.
It can be busy. It can be busy throughout the Southeast and the Midwest. And I was born in Chattanooga, and I've spent part of my childhood here. And I remember the riverfront when you just didn't go down there. And seeing what's happened in the last really 25 years. I've been away, and having coming back here, starting to work back in here in the last decade or so. It is pretty amazing what Chattanooga has been able to do. We just know there's a lot of work here that we do from a standpoint of banks, developers, and people who are coming in and wanting to tap into the resources that are here in Chattanooga. So yes, there is a lot of interest in Chattanooga for sure.
Great. Well, John, how can someone reach you if they wanted to talk further about brownfields and of the environmental angles?
We have a website, www.pmenv.com. Google PM Environmental. My email address is Hargraves at pmenv.com. And my local number here is 423-468-1105. And I'm in several different offices throughout the Southeast. But if you call that number, then it's it ends up being forwarded into where I can be reached. So those are the easiest ways.
Absolutely great. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today with Chattanooga Business Radio. My name is Drew Urbance, and we look forward to seeing you next time.